Thanks everybody for joining. We've got quite a bit to cover here in the next hour or so. So just to kind of level set the agenda, we want to start off by just doing a quick overview of business analytics just to make sure we're all on the same page and kind of thinking of things the same way. Then we want to dive in a little bit into the process, and what I like to do here is just try to put ourselves into the shoes of our end users that are ultimately going to be going through this and try to understand the things they might need. And the real point here is that, we're going to focus a lot on technology, and specifically the technology that's becoming available in SQL Server 2012. But beyond technology, there is obviously a people element and definitely a process element, as well as a content element that needs to be considered to achieve successful business analytics. Once we do those few slides, we'll jump into a nice demo highlighting some new capabilities in the product, and then we'll end in probably the deepest of our technical discussions, just talking through what's being introduced as the BI Semantic model in SQL 2012, and then we'll take questions at the end. So what is business analytics? There was a movie that came out recently. It was a book before that called Moneyball. And if, for those of you that read the book or seen the movie, you know that it's about baseball, and at some point a statistician decided that, hey, there's got to be more to the game of baseball than just chance and strong sluggers. Perhaps there's patterns, and if we took time to sort of collect all this data about hits and errors and just sort of the dynamics of the game, we might be able to uncover some metrics that allow us to that will tell us what predicts a winning season. So in fact, they did. The Oakland Athletics hired this guy and his process and sort of followed it, and it kind of flew in the face of most of baseball, which is very sort of gut-based scouting. These guys go and watch games and see people who they think look like good baseball players, and they recruit them. And what he proved is through the use of math and data and statistics that you can actually win games, and it might not necessarily be with who you think you might need on the team. So if it can be applied to the world of baseball, professional sports, it certainly can be applied to our organizations. Many of us are obviously familiar and have made big investments in business intelligence over the last decade or maybe even longer if your business has been around for a while. And what BI really tried to do is give us that who, that what, where, and when we look at the operations of our business. What business analytics is trying to do is build on top of that and try to now answer the why and the how. Because if we can answer why and how, we'll have an opportunity to determine if it's going to happen again and try to be more predictive. If it's good things that are happening in our business, we obviously want more of them. If there are bad things that we don't want to happen, we'd obviously like to try to avoid them. And you can use this in an internal or external way. Internally, you can use it as a sort of performance management capability, meaning, I want to manage my team's performance. Here are the things that, we should be aware of, and if something's not going right, I can drill all the way down and be able to see, oh, it's because of, my associates falling short in this category. Answering those hows and whys, let's just do that. To bash a little bit more on business intelligence, we've spent the last decade in a consolidation mode. I think this happened both in the industry. You saw mega vendors getting bigger by acquiring more products to kind of fill out their portfolios, or in some cases developing products organically to fill out their portfolios. And internally in our organizations, we built out these enterprise data warehouses, right, because we want this 360-degree view of the organization. Now, it's great that we've got and made these data investments. The data and good quality data is a key component to all this. But if you look at the statistics that are being published by the analyst firms and the surveys, you see very little adoption. Most people in an organization, the majority of an organization, when asked, do you have the information you need to do your job, still answers no. Right? So we have to ask ourselves, what more can we do with that data? Well, one of the things that we feel is crucial to try to bridge that gap between, hey, this massive amount of data and these end users that are still telling us they don't have what they need, is to focus on those users. And this is not something that I'm making up. If you look at Gartner's maturity model, and this one's old, it's been around for years, but the level 5, the one on the far right there is called pervasive, and the meaning of the word means to try to get this out to as many people and processes in your organization, right? Forrester, similarly, they published a report just earlier last year, trends for 2011 and beyond, and pervasive featured very prominently in that report. But it's difficult to just read those reports, listen to the analysts. They put out a lot of good theory, but then it's up to us in the organizations, right, to implement this and actually execute. And so one of the ways that we feel you can achieve pervasive BI is through business analytics. But there's certainly some thought that needs to be put into how that could all come about. Certainly, it requires everybody in the organization to mature, along that maturity scale. Not everybody's going to start out with all the skills necessary to be successful. So we try to summarize the process for doing business analytics, and like I said before, put ourselves into the shoes of our end users and try to imagine what they're going to go through in trying to employ this approach, right? So the three-step process all starts with acquire, then analyze, and then ultimately apply it. So when we acquire, what are we trying to acquire? Well, data is a big part of it, and data could be corporate data or non-corporate data, but also acquiring skills, the techniques that are necessary to apply. Hey, maybe I need a refresher on that statistics course I took in college to look at data differently than I have before. Ultimately, then you start to analyze the data. It's important to have good tools that can let you aggregate and pull that data together, do some analysis around it, visualize it, and then once I've gotten through this expect it to be iterative process of analysis, I then want and have a golden nugget of insight that I want to share with other people, and that's really the applying part. How do I do that? Think about, if I had a question, how do I get an answer to that question, right? I can try to go search, either Google, out on the web, or our own corporate portal, and try to find, assets that may have been published by somebody else in the company. I may try to find that person, that subject matter expert that can help me. And this whole process of going through our organization, both on the content and the people side, and trying to find these assets is really called knowledge management. And it's a little bit beyond the scope of BI, BA, and really SQL Server, although you need a database to store all this information in. But I just wanted to make this point as a critical step one, that it's more than just about the technology and this content that we're going to go through these next few steps, and in the demo we'll be producing content. We don't want to neglect being able to catalog what was in the findings that we had, so that other people down the road, for posterity's sake, can find this information. And in terms of tools and techniques to get this done, content management is a key part of it. So not just, I have a file share, or maybe I have a portal, but it's really just an online file share, and we're just throwing stuff up there. Because if we just throw it, it's likely never to be found again. It's going to be this black hole. So being able to attach metadata and attributes that describe the content, having a controlled vocabulary that we agree as a business, this is how we talk, or we recognize, even if we're a global business or a very distributed organization, that we may talk differently. There may be synonyms for different things, but we're meaning the same thing, and being able to kind of structure that into our daily lives so that we can ultimately speak the same language eventually. And of course, search is a key part of it. If we go out, think about our personal lives using Google, and just knowing that here's this fast search engine that I type something into, and more often than not, that first page of results has the content that I was looking for. What if we could have that inside of our own organizations? And then the last piece, the social element. Obviously, social is a pretty big buzzword these days. But if you simplify it down, the techniques and the tricks aside, to just finding and connecting with people and having, applications that enable us to do that, that rounds out the mix. And if you are a Microsoft customer, you likely have some element of SharePoint out there in your organization, and SharePoint really does enable you to do a lot of this. So on to the next step, analysis. So now that we've got a question that we want to answer, we've got the pieces that we think we can analyze. How do I explore this, right? So first I got to try to make sense of it. If it's the first time that I'm seeing it, I'm trying to rationalize what's in here, what's been done before. As I start to iterate through this process, I'm going to want to have the capability, and of being able to, take this thing, shake it, twist it, turn it, throw it up against the wall, and then hopefully, as I iterate through that, I'll come up with that nugget of insight that I want to do something with. And if I find that nugget of insight, here again, it's important that I can describe it really well so that other people come looking for this down the road. They're not reproducing my efforts, that we're all building on each other's efforts. So what this task sort of entail? Certainly getting access to data very cleanly and easily. And like I said before, it could be corporate or non-corporate data. Being able to do some what-if analysis and planning, apply some statistical analysis to it. And then ultimately, you can only get so much by looking at a grid of data. And once you start to visualize that data in various ways, you can start to see things that you may not have seen before. And when we get into the demo in a little bit here, as we start to look at SQL 2012 a little deeper, the tools and techniques that kind of make up this step in that product suite are Power Pivot for Excel 2010, which is a plugin for Excel, and the Power View, which is a new feature that allows you to do data visualization. So if we've got this nugget of insight, as we move into step 3, and I wanted to be able to do something with it, if it's still kind of maturing for me, I might just want to collaborate. I want to find my peers or somebody I respect or that subject matter expert I found and really, float it up and have, a conversation around what we're looking at here and how to make it better. At some point, though, we're going to end up with something that we want to actually run our business around. And that kind of takes two forms. What we call publishing is just a form of taking, say, a measurement, a metric, in the BI world, it's sort of delivered through a dashboard, and being able to publish that out. So let's say I'm a sales manager, and I've done my analysis, and I've got something to think of value that's going to help my team sell more product. I want to be able to publish that out to them in a way that, they have their own sort of screen that they can go to and see their metrics. And know that they're tracking against them accordingly and they're not falling behind. Alternatively, if we don't want to require somebody to have to keep checking and looking, then we can take the more automated route. And in here, what we're talking about is, putting and operationalizing some of these insights, but in such a way that they trigger us and alert us when something's falling out of line. So if we had some expected norms and something's crossed a threshold, let the system tell us that we have an issue, so we don't have to keep an eye on it. If we're not getting any alerts, we know things are going well. And this whole process is really about taking analytics, which can seem somewhat intimidating. You may have a few people in the organization that are grasping it and doing it well, and getting it out of that sort of quote-unquote lab environment and out into the field. So when we look at the product in a little bit here, the tools and techniques that we'll be focusing on to achieve this step are the Power Pivot, in this case for a SharePoint plugin. So this enables you to take workbooks that you've developed inside of Excel and put them up in SharePoint for sharing via the web browser. And then once that's up there and you're in SharePoint, the capability of attaching self-service alerts in sort of that automation scenario. All right, so that brings us to our demonstration. What we're going to look through here in the next few minutes as we go through this process that we just outlined of acquiring data, analyzing it, and applying it, the tools, like I said, that we'll be using, a little bit of Power Pivot for Excel to acquire the data, analyzing the data with Power View in a data visualization scenario, and then applying some self-service alerting and automating our business around it. So jumping into Power Pivot, I'm going to want to walk through the tabs that are available in here. And what I'm going to highlight is really the differences between Power Pivot version 1 and Power Pivot version 2. Just a second here while it comes up. Okay. So the differences here, if you're not familiar with the interface, basically Power Pivot is this window that comes up out of Excel, separate add-in, allows you to get data from a number of different sources. Arguably, a lot of those are going to be like a corporate source, enterprise data warehouse that you have built. But the important point to take away here is that you have access to additional data or even data from a web service. It can be internal, external. It doesn't matter. The other things to point out in this in the ribbon that are new in this version, if you look at all the way towards the right-hand side of the screen, there's an area for measures. And finally, in this new version, version 2, we've got the ability to create a KPI. So that capability didn't exist. It's been brought over. If you've ever used analysis services and created a KPI in there, it's very similar. It's just a drag and not a drag and drop, but user interface, simple user interface to allow you to set some thresholds and compare one measure to another or one measure to a fixed value. And then additionally, you have some different views, like a diagram view or a tabular view. The diagram view is new, so it's more of an entity relationship diagram, so you can see the data kind of in a more visual sense. Before, all you had was what looked like data sheets. On the design tab, the buttons have been moved around a little bit, but for the most part, they haven't changed too significantly. Yeah. You have a new button over on the right that allows you to mark as a data table. And then the last new tab is this advanced tab. Here you see an option for perspectives. So perspectives was introduced. This is giving you the ability to, if you're familiar with analysis services, it's the similar concept, take your measures and attributes that you've got inside of your model and really subdivide them so that maybe you have a perspective for a finance crowd versus a sales crowd, that sort of thing. And what this does is that later on in the pivot table, as you're working with the data and pulling it out of your model, you have the ability to, on this drop-down, pull down and say, I want the finance perspective, I want the sales perspective. That just filters it out and put less stuff in front of the user, basically to make it as simple as possible for them. And then all the way over on the far right, the little checkbox image URL, that gives you the ability to take a column inside. It's typically going to be a URL if you've got one in there. Mark it as an image URL. And this is telling data visualization tools like PowerView that there's actually a URL to an image here. And what that enables is, as you'll see later, is to, for instance, if you have a list of products and you have images for the products, you can see those images. So before we jump into actually doing the demo, I kind of want to set the stage. With business analytics, it's obviously very difficult to produce something that's going to be very meaningful for a big crowd, a dispersed crowd. Everybody on the phone is from various industries. But in this case, we try to pick something that everybody would understand. So let's pretend for now that we are a car manufacturer. We picked Saab in our example here. We're looking at it as a service department and getting some statistics about, who's coming in for service, what are they having done, and to help us basically see if there's sort of patterns unfolding in that data. One of the things we'll look at is in Power Pivot, what we've done is we have imported some data from a corporate source. And as a result, we have that data. We're able to add calculations. Now, the way you do calculations in Power Pivot, if you're not familiar with it, is in a language called DAX. So in the old OLAP world, you had a language called MDX that allowed you to move through various query your cube, basically. That's been sort of complemented now in this new Power Pivot world with a language called DAX. The purpose here is that you have Excel. You have an environment where people are used to typing in Excel formulas if they've been trained on that, that this language is now plugging in and using that same syntax, so it's very trainable, but extending Excel formulas to be more data friendly and be able to work with some of these constructs. So if we can click down here on the calculation, we'll look at an example of a DAX statement. As you can see, very similar, open parentheses, close parentheses, and as you type, you're able to get IntelliSense. And because the columns in these sheets are named and typed, it stays pretty structured, and so that IntelliSense can help you pick, the name of your column. And in this case, what we wanted to do is, going back to our example, we're doing car service costs and how many, the quantity of the amount of times somebody brought their car in divided by the average amount of our service bill. So once we've got this, we've got a model, we've got a calculation. It's very simple. Now, we can go back into the world of Excel, and the nice thing that happens here is if we go and try to create a pivot table off of this, if you're familiar with creating pivot tables, the interface here hasn't changed. The only thing, if you look real closely and you look at the field list over on the right-hand side, it is that model that we had in our Power Pivot window, as well as the calculations that we started to introduce. And this allows us to quickly, be able to traverse this data, look at it in this pivot table fashion, and try to sort of establish our bearings and then rationalize it a little bit. Now, let's assume we're happy here. So that we can move into the visualization piece. So what I would do right at this point is this is where SharePoint comes in, and Power Pivot for SharePoint. So in the File menu, we have Save and Send, and under Save and Send, we have the option to save to SharePoint. And we would have an address, or we could browse up to our SharePoint libraries and find the one to drop this workbook in, and just simply click Save and do that. Now, in the interest of time, we're not going to actually walk through it. It takes a few seconds to save. We can open up Internet Explorer and show you that the workbook is living there in our SharePoint portal. And the portal is actually able to let us visualize this workbook and interact with it. So if we bring it up, all this sort of clicking and filtering and sorting that we were able to do inside of Excel, we are now doing in a web browser. Now, to add to this, we didn't just upload a workbook and have this fancy UI capability. All that data and that model came with it. So what this enables us to do is to start building things off of that model. And one of those things that we can build off of that model is a Power View report. And Power View, as we explained earlier, is the data visualization capability that just got introduced with SQL Server 2012. And so in this case, we've started to create a Power View report simply by clicking a little option or button on our old model and are able to, or have the data from that model available to us here, and we're able to start building a report. So in this case, we're looking at this service analysis. One of the nice ways of being able to evaluate something from a sort of analytical perspective is a scatter plot chart. So a colleague here is going to build a scatter plot for us. And what that's going to enable us to do is see sort of the relationship between the number of visits that we had for a particular model. And by model, we're actually doing the model number or name and the year that's associated with it. And then the cost of those repairs. And as these dots sort of render up here on the screen, as you can always expect, there's demo gremlins to contend with. And once those dots render, we'll see that in a second, the nice other element or feature of this tool is there's actually a play axis. So what we'll eventually see is that not only the relationship between these service calls, but then we can actually animate them over time and see how that transpired, and see if we have a problem that's starting out small and slowly getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and kind of catch that visually. So if we're looking at our data here, we see the big purple dot, the purple elephant in the room, if you will, over here in the upper right, and that's basically showing us that our model, which is our SUV model, had the most number of service calls, had the most cost associated with them. And this is on a sort of absolute basis, so what I'm saying there is it'd be better to put this on a relative basis, meaning a percentage of the total number of cars like this that we sold that came back with service problems and those costs. But as you add percentages and calculations and some of the more advanced math to it, you get a better sort of analytical equation. So let's pull up the one we completed just to kind of fast forward ahead here in the interest of time. What we want to show here is the interactivity that you can have between two charts as you visualize them. So with that big dot, it's now actually green. If I actually click on that dot to try to dive in a little bit deeper, what we've done at the bottom here is put in a bar chart and broken down the repairs by categories that we've established. So are they engine repairs? Are they transmission repairs? Is it body work? Is it electrical work? And so we can quickly and easily see that the majority of our issues with this particular vehicle were on the transmission side. So we sort of answered that, why did this happen? Why is it up here? Oh, it's because of the transmission problems. And now we can take it even a step further. Maybe we had different kinds of transmissions in these cars over the course of that model year or a course of a set of model years. Anyways, it allows us to get that insight and to start to dig deeper. Just to kind of point out, we did the play axis. Maybe we can play it again. But as the things move, you're able to see their size and shape change relatively. And then also you can turn on this trailing feature where you can see kind of where something has been over time to help you, kind of see it a little bit better. So that's an example of visualization and the use of Power View. It's got a number of chart features. It is, a version 1 product. So, with Microsoft, really any mega vendor, you kind of want them to get to a V2 before it's there. For instance, we were talking about Power Pivot a little bit earlier, and the fact that KPIs were just now introduced in version 2. And with any BI tool, it's sort of common to expect that KPIs would be in there. So that's definitely going to get advanced over time, and in an unofficial capacity, we've heard that it's not going to be the next release of SQL Server before this product has a V2. So there'll be incremental upgrades and updates to Power View. And certainly there's enough buzz around there about it, and people giving feedback to Microsoft that I'm sure they'll continue to build it out rather quickly. So now moving into step 3 of that process that we laid out at the beginning. One thing that we want to do now is we've got this data that we were just looking at, and we know sort of the relative thresholds, I guess, that we're comfortable with in terms of our repair orders and the quantity. And maybe from that analysis, we've come up with some thresholds that say, hey, if we go across these thresholds, meaning if our number of repairs spikes above a certain point, or if the amount of dollar-wise of the repairs goes over a certain threshold, then we want to get alerted so we can start looking into the problem and see, is it something we need to focus on. So one of the things we can do is as you may remember, we published that model at a Power Pivot in Excel out to SharePoint. And from there, we built that Power View report, right? Well, alternatively, instead of building a Power View report, we could have built a reporting services report as well. And reporting services is the technology that you want to use when you're trying to operationalize something, meaning from sort of a distribution standpoint, which we're not going to get into in this webinar, or in this case from the alerting perspective. And what this tool that Jeff just brought up is basically a tool called Report Builder. This is the end user, kind of falling into that pattern of self-service tools. This is a self-service report building tool. There are developer-focused report building tools as well that are far more complicated, or more powerful, I should say. But this one gets the job done. And in this case, for our example here, we want to set up some thresholds to measure so that we can alert against them. And reporting services and Report Builder allows us to build a simple report that's just going to get those numbers out onto a report, so then we can hook our alerts into it. So we built this report. We've got it all set up. We've saved and published it to SharePoint. From there, you want to go and actually open this report in SharePoint. And in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a drop-down menu for actions. There's a number of things you can do from that menu, but the one we want to focus on here is called New Data Alert. And what you'll see here is basically that self-service user interface that's going to allow me as an analyst or business user to take various data elements that are coming up in this report and apply some rules to them, and then so that I can be notified when that rule gets broken. So what I want to compare here is to look at our quantity, which is our total number of service calls that we had, and just say, for example, we figured out that the 50 is that threshold. That 50, in this case, we're going to hard code, but we could obviously do it as a calculation all the way back in our model, even have an extra column. That's our threshold that we don't want to cross. Do sort of a standard deviation calculation, perhaps, and say, let me know when it bounces off outside these accepted norms. And that would be able to be pulled up in here. And just to kind of play this through a little bit further, the other rule we want to put in is, and our average cost is greater than $3,000. So these are thresholds that we're picking in, like I said, hard coding, but you could have this be all data-driven as well. And then let's schedule this alert to happen. The tool actually gives me the ability to do it at a pretty low frequency. Makes me a little nervous, honestly, if end users are setting this up every minute to be notified that something's happening. But daily, maybe hourly is not a bad thing to keep an eye on these some of these metrics. And then the distribution is most commonly going to be via email. You can set up obviously a group alias or an individual to email this to. You have some control of the subject line and a little note that goes into it. And from there, if we had Outlook on here, we would be able to get the alert once the process ran. And this is all still SharePoint, so it does require SharePoint. It uses SharePoint's scheduling capabilities to kick these off and do these comparisons, validate these rules, and email these reports out. But it's overall a pretty simple interface, straightforward to use, that allows you to automate some of this analytics. So let's kick back to the slide deck. Now we're going to enter the last part of our session here and just do a little bit of a deep dive on one of the biggest introductions inside of SQL Server 2012 from a technical perspective. The term is now BI Semantic Model and has been dubbed BISM for short. Not sure if I really like that acronym. And the thing to remember here, so this is the marketing piece, is now there's this thing called BISM multidimensional. And all that is the old OLAP analysis services as you knew it before, renamed as BISM multidimensional. And the new piece is the tabular mode. And tabular, what this is doing is taking the technology that was introduced in Power Pivot version 1 that came out with SQL Server 2008 R2, and taking that and moving it out of just being in Excel and making it more prominent on the server and, more importantly, more capable of being developed by our programmers, our IT department. So before, or with the currently available release, it's all done through Excel. You have to open up Excel. You do your modeling in there. You can upload it to SharePoint, but there's really no developer tools to kind of take it from there. So what Microsoft's done is enabled developers to be able to access and build, actually from scratch even, these tabular models from Visual Studio. Now, one benefit that we can gain from this is that age-old problem, where IT and the business aren't quite seeing eye to eye, or maybe talking past each other, and business says, "I'll know it when I see it," and IT doesn't really have any idea where to start, and there's a whole lot of time that's wasted in trying to get to that place. Everything we've seen so far, and taking these tools that are intended to be self-service and end-user focused, allows us, either as IT people or those people in your organization that maybe are the bridge between IT and the business, those liaisons, power users, analysts, to work with the subject matter experts in the business to rapidly prototype something. It's sort of teach a man to fish. Hopefully they're catching on to how you're using these tools. Hopefully you've got some content out on your portal that helps them go back to something and documents how these tools are being used, and enables them to start doing more of it on their own. And as they iterate through and find those nuggets of insight, obviously, going back to the example, if I'm a sales manager, I found something that I can manage my team with, that's fine. It's sort of in that team scenario. But the minute I connect with a peer of mine and he or she is interested in also managing their team off of the same metrics, it's arguable that now I've created something of corporate value. And it would be good to be able to, at that point, get IT involved. And the nice thing about this is we have this perfect example. We've got actually, it's in production, if you will, something we can show them and say, hey, this is what we did, this is what we're doing, take this and make it better. And the things that they can make better by having developer tools around the tabular mode is, for example, really fine-grained security, right? So it worked for my team, it was great because we could just dump out our data and that's all we needed to see inside of our Power Pivot. But the minute I introduce my peer and his or her group, and it goes from there, we now maybe want to secure this data by our territories or lines of business or whatnot. And it's the developer tools that will enable the developers to put in some of those finer grained security requirements and take it from there. So some technical differences between these two modes. So if you're familiar with OLAP and analysis services, the BISM multidimensional is really that engine, and then, as you know, you were querying it with the MDX language. On the tabular side, the engine is a little bit different. It's called Vertipack. It's a columnar store. It's in memory. It compresses really well, and because it is in memory, it can calculate things very, very quickly. Now, as you saw, the language, the query language changed a little bit. It was that sort of Excel formula-like DAX expression language. But I've got a sub-bullet here to just kind of point out if you do have your tabular model up on SharePoint that's being queried maybe through other tools, even tools that have been around before this came out, it can be queried with MDX as well. So what are some benefits? I mean, the common question here is going to be, when do I use it? Do I have to go convert all my cubes now? It's funny, when a new technology comes out, there's so much reaction, especially on the technical side of the house, that this is it. This is the silver bullet. This is going to solve all my problems. Now it's either this or that. It's all or nothing. There's never any in between. And it's not the case here with this stuff. One of the areas where tabular will actually outperform multidimensional, there's a couple of use cases that we found. If you've ever done inventory analysis or tried to do account balances, just point-in-time, snapshot type reporting, you've seen that it's somewhat difficult. There's quite a bit of work that's involved in setting that up. Tabular actually is able to do it without any of that extra work, just as a calculation. It's able to return those results very, very quickly, being an in-memory engine. Another scenario is customer ratings or perhaps financial instrument ratings, right? So if I've got my customers segmented, and these are our A customers, and those are our B customers, and those are our C customers, or financial instruments like a bond rating, perhaps, and then ultimately tracking the changes over those ratings over time. Each of those scenarios was a little bit challenging and required some work to implement in the multidimensional world. Whereas here on the tabular side, we can forego some of the infrastructure setup that was involved before and actually get it and be able to do it in memory. So just to dive into each of these a little bit closer, in terms of balances, a common approach to solving this problem in the OLAP or now multidimensional world was to create snapshot tables. So say I wanted to measure our inventory every week, I would actually create a table to track that measurement every week, and so we knew what we were storing. What that resulted in is, a bunch of extra ETL that I had to develop. It had a pretty complicated SQL, and then querying it via MDX ended up not performing all that well anyways. In the new world with tabular, if you were to use tabular mode to solve this problem, you wouldn't have to have the ETL. You could take just your raw table of data the way you have it today. You would have no SQL to worry about to get the data into the cube. There's none of that involved. You basically would just write a DAX query to pull this off. On the other use case of just looking at ratings attributes, in the multidimensional world, so if I had that customer rating or that bond rating, and I wanted to store it and persist it with the data, it was kind of a two-trip approach as one technique to solve the problem. So I'd have my table of customer and customer activity. I'd load that into my cube. I would then look at the various ratings. I might pull that out of my cube, put it back in the table to only reprocess the customer or the financial instrument dimension, and store that along with it. And obviously that's a fair amount of development work involved in doing that. In the tabular approach, we have this, as we saw when we looked at Power Pivot, notion of calculated columns. And those are sort of akin to data source, the calculations we had in our data source views inside of analysis services. But if you're familiar with analysis services, the data source view is just issuing SQL basically back to the database to then pull it in and store it inside the cube. Well, now this calculated column is able to take the data that we have inside of Power Pivot or our BISM tabular model and execute that command and do it at runtime. There's no need for reprocessing the data. The DAX query may be a little bit intimidating. It's probably not the first thing you'd hit to pull this off, but if somebody gets it done in the organization once, if they document it well, it's easy to repeat those steps. And then the rating changes. So similarly, following on the use case before, but now tracking these changes over time. I want to see, when customers went from A to B, or when our bond rating was increased or decreased. The before world, one approach to solving it, you had some very complicated SQL leading to a pretty complicated OLAP model. You'd have to create some bridge tables, sort of factless facts in some cases, as they were called, many-to-many relationships in your cubes. And again, a bunch of infrastructure associated with doing that. Here in the tabular approach, we don't have any of that duplication of data. We're able to just execute DAX right onto our raw data that we've brought in. Here again, yes, it's going to take a few tries to get the DAX formula, or hopefully leverage an expert in DAX to come in and help you write the first one. But once you're over that hurdle, you can copy that easily, that approach very easily, and get it done a lot faster. So to summarize the differences, most importantly, to take anything out of here, away from this webinar, is that it's not either or. We're not, killing off analysis services tomorrow and you've got to rebuild everything. Microsoft says so. Definitely not the case. There's going to be, as you saw, some times when tabular makes a lot more sense. The in-memory engine makes a lot more sense, that VertiPack engine. And then there's going to be times when the multidimensional world is still appropriate. MDX obviously has been around, and OLAP has been around for a long time. VertiPack and then now the tabular mode is now version 2. So the technology is going to need some time to develop, but we are already seeing some of those benefits in the examples that we just laid out. So we've covered a lot to kind of think about next steps. If this is something you're thinking about, either from well, how do we even get started with business analytics, or we've got a big SQL Server investment and we've done this on the BI side pretty well. We want to think about getting more self-service capability out there, empowering our users to be more analytical. We've got a strategy assessment that we offer where we come and help you roadmap that process. Obviously, it starts with understanding the business a little bit, where the pain points are, where the opportunities are, if you will. Looking at organizational readiness, not just from a technology perspective, from a business perspective as well, because as we mentioned at the beginning, this is more than just about technology. And as we prioritize that roadmap, certainly it makes most sense to look at things that are fairly straightforward to achieve, or at least not stubbornly difficult, and have a fair amount of business value so that we can get those wins and get some momentum behind our program. And then what better way to sell the business on it than actually let them see it, touch it, feel it, and being able to have a live example with your data, with one of your processes, enables you to do that really, really well. So I'm going to turn it over to questions and Monica in a second here, but a little bit more about our team, as you can read on the slide here as we begin questions. We have had the opportunity to write a couple books on SQL Server. The next one's coming out in a few months. We'll have a bunch of launch events that you can look out for. And if you have any questions that you didn't want to share on the webinar this afternoon, don't hesitate to write us at bi@talon.com, and we will get back to you promptly.